Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to ENO's Leadership Webinar Series. We are very excited to be hosting Dr. Beverly Scott with us today. My name's Erin Shoemate. I'm the Deputy Director of Professional Development Programs here at ENO, and this webinar series is a part of a quarterly continuing education speaker series that we do where we really have senior executives tell their leadership story, tips for executive success, and their outlook for trends facing the industry. Before we begin, I just want to go over a little bit of logistics, how the questions are going to work, because if you have any questions, there are two ways you can ask them. The first way is to type into the question box, where we will moderate them throughout the entire presentation. The next one is to raise your hand in the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll be able to see that you've raised your hand, and then we can unmute you so that you can actually ask your question. Bev would like this to really be an intimate conversation about leadership, so we encourage you to ask as many questions, and feel free to ask them using your voice and not just using the question box. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our webinar presenter for today, Dr. Bev Scott. She is the CEO of Beverly Scott Associates, LLC, and the Senior Partner for Parker Infrastructure Partners, LLC. She's had a number of positions in her career, but 4 as General Manager and CEO. She was the General Manager or CEO of the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, so the MBTA, the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority, or MARTA, the Sacramento Regional Transit Authority, SRTD, and the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority, RIPTA, RIPTA. She's really recognized across the transportation industry for her visionary leadership, her dedication to workforce and workforce development, and her focus on people and communities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bev, and then she'll talk about her career journey and her advice for you all, and then we will open it up to questions. So Bev, I'm going to turn it to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and I appreciate everybody joining. I was laughing when they asked me to do this. I told them, I said, well, we're going to try to do this as more or less like an intimate conversation. I called it a bit of Charterhouse rules with, I'm sure, would have probably been many friends and colleagues and folks that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet. And I'm going to be as candid as I possibly can about just about my journey, and take from it what you find valuable. My grandmother used to say things like, I'll put a pin in it when there was something that just kind of struck her that she wanted to kind of be able to mull over. So that's the way that I'm going to go through this today. And I'm going to give me maybe about 10, 15 minutes to get started. And then after that, please feel free to jump in. Okay. I'll start off by telling you just a little bit about myself and how I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. You don't hear very much of that in my voice, but I grew up in Cleveland, and I stayed there until I was about 16 years old, until I went away to college. I think just like almost all young people, if you had asked me to stay in Cleveland at that time to go to school, to go to college, I would have told you, oh, no way, because you never want to stay home. But I have had, as I've looked back and really appreciate where I grew up, okay? But of course, saw all of the major changes that wound up taking place, a lot of devastation. I grew up right in the middle of the riots, and so I have that as a very real reference point. I was definitely a kid. I was a child of the 60s and the 70s. We were not privileged, okay, but I felt that I had everything that I needed, to tell you the honest to God's truth, in terms of family, values, and very hardworking folks. I started off by saying when I went to college, and there was never a thought. I was really a poor kid, okay, but there was never a thought in my mind. Poor, I would say, in terms of necessarily economics, but certainly not in terms of values or aspirations, and real fortitude, okay? My parents, from the very beginning, and I don't know how they thought it, just kept telling us, get a good education, get a good education, get a good education. And then they would say, and get a good job. Okay, so I'm going to put a footnote in that, because as I talk to young people today, I say get a good education, get a good education. It's a gateway to opportunity, and that opportunity can in fact wind up being employment, but that can also be an entrepreneurial opportunity. And it may be, through your lifetime, it may be both. Okay, because I think we do a disservice if all we do is tell people is gear folks only towards a notion of employment. Okay, so anyway, and then a lot of educators in my family and ministers. Okay, and so just kind of salt of the earth folks. Okay, So let me tell you, I fell into transit, okay? I went to graduate school and I went to HBCUs. I went to Fisk for my undergraduate degree, and then I went to Howard for my graduate degree. And I was, and this is going to give you a little piece about networking, and I was minding my business, teaching government and public affairs, my first little position, over at Tennessee State University. And I had a former professor who was in Houston at the time in Texas Southern, who sent me a little application form with a note at the top of it and said, thought you might be interested. And it was for a Houston Carnegie Urban Fellows program, which was they intended it to be a bit of a knockoff of the White House Fellows program. They were going to select 4 people. The notion would be that you would be in municipal government for an 18-month period. You would enrich municipal government, and they would enrich you, and you would take that experience back with you. And I applied. This is how things have happened in my life. I applied, and I'll be doggone if I didn't wind up being one of the 4 people they selected. And so when I tell you that I've been in this industry for 40 years, I'm not kidding. I was selected in the late fall of 1976. Before there ever was a Houston Metro, okay, and I reported for duty, if you will, in January of 1977. And when they had asked me, when I was selected, which department of city government that I want to work in, well, back in those days, I often laugh and tell people, I said, well, back in those days, anybody that I knew that was a person of color or a woman who was in any type of a senior executive position, I have tremendous respect for relations areas today, but back in those days, they were always in a relations area. They were community relations, or government relations, or some kind of human resources relations, but they did not seem to me to be in the heart of the core of the operation. So I said that I either wanted to be in transportation or sanitation, okay? And so at that point in time, Houston, it was the city of Houston's Office of Public Transportation. It never did actually attain the status of a department, because for those of you who, in fact, that may even be on the line who are from Houston, Houston was very late in terms of going over to public transportation, okay? So anyway, long story short, when I walked in, Houston had an unsuccessful referendum, the first one in 1973, and they were bound and determined that they were that can-do Texas attitude, that they were going to come back. And so in the wake of Proposition 13 out here in California in 1976, they formed an interim board of directors. There were 5 people. I can see them all very well. And in true Texas fashion, they cut that community up. They largely lost HARTA in 1973 because of African American and the Hispanic community overwhelmingly came out against HARTA. Please put a footnote in that. I have been through my lifetime in 7 what I call runs for the money in one shape or form. Either they were ballot measures or major legislative initiatives to wind up getting increased funding for public transportation. And in each instance, when they have lost largely because of equity issues that were either unaddressed or poorly addressed, okay? That has been one reason they've lost. The other is lack of transparency with people and believing that one could run these as very slick campaigns without actually getting out into and getting sticky with the public, okay? And so, we've won more at places than lost, but through the years, there have been 7 of them. And in each instance, the ones that are most memorable, the 1977 one in Houston passed. However, they came back with another referendum when I was there in late 1983, and that one lost horribly, and Houston took roughly 20 years before they were able to come back and actually build what had been largely on the drawing boards 20 years before. Okay, so those are some of the kind of lessons of when you go. That was a real hard lesson, but when you lose them, sometimes how much time it can take you to actually wind up recovering. And probably the most recent one was the one at MARTA in 2012, okay? And that was largely, subsequently, there was the one that passed was not as big as the one that had been on the table in 2012. And that one, I will tell you as well, at the heart of it, issues in terms of equity and restitution, if you will, to the MARTA areas for the 40 years that they had been putting in the money, and other counties, the surrounding counties, had not, okay? Once again, put a pin in it, the criticality of addressing and squarely addressing equity issues in a total community, and when you're all in, you are all in. And I've often said, and for those of you who know me, I'm an all-in kind of person, okay? So anyway, and we were successful with that referendum, and then and now it's in fact I was able to, 20 years later, I have a lot of family in Texas, and I was actually able to ride on the opening day on that first leg that wound up being opened, and it was really very meaningful. Okay, now I will give you other takeaways from there, and I'm going to take you a little bit through this. I thanked Houston for this. I tell people that I was in Houston from 1977 until 1984. During that period of time, we had 5 different general managers, presidents, executive directors, acting, interim, and permanent, and I can name them, okay? So as a young woman, I had the opportunity to see really what was literally an open door, if you will, of different folks who came in. Here you are, you're looking at it first, you say, my God, this person was the best thing since sliced bread just 18 months ago. What wound up happening? And it gave me a big perspective, though, in terms of a couple of things. Number one, organizations need different things at different times. So it's not, I don't get into the jailhouse rock or whatever, but I'm very clear. Organizations need different things at different times, and organizations will go to get that, okay, you know what I'm saying? Organizations, that was one lesson. Lesson 2, organizations, so when I look at that in a transit context, and I say to people, know yourself and know the organization that you're going to. It's not that you can't, you can't do everything if you have the right team. You can. However, their organizations are different when they're startups, when they're in planning modes, when they're in building modes, when they're in operating modes, okay? And those are, in my experience, different presenting skill sets in terms of the work of the agency itself. And they are different typically in terms of the broader context within which you're operating, the interest of the broader context within which you're operating. And so when you think of yourself as a leader, an aspiring leader, a leader, and emerging, but when you think of yourself, I've always, tried to be real clear. I'm a startup, fix-up, change, transition manager. My typical lifespan in organizations is about 3 to 5 years, typically more on the 5-year period of time, okay? You wouldn't, I laugh and say I probably wouldn't be the best person. In fact, I know I wouldn't in a maintenance type organization, and that is in no way suggesting that there is one phase of an organization's need, if you will, that is better than another, okay? I have tremendous respect for those who need to rock that steady ship, okay? Rock that steady ship and do what they need to do, okay? But we're going to either take a mountain, make a mountain, a lot of change going on, got to do, highly intense, and you drive yourself crazy and everybody around you. If you stayed, if you as a person or as people or as an organization stayed in that mode, okay, you know what I'm saying? I'll never forget when I left Houston, I went from Houston to New York. Now, Houston was really a startup operation. I went to New York, and that was in the midst of the first big renaissance, and we worked like dogs, okay, and that was under Dave Dunn, and it was the laughing stock, American graffiti. The system was on its last legs, and we got the big 5-6 year piece with Bob Kiley. First Governor Cuomo was there. And it was, we're going to revitalize the New York City subway. We got a $12 billion capital program. And for roughly about a 5-year period of time, to tell you the honest to God's truth, if it wasn't an urgent matter relative to public safety or education, we were at the top of the list. But we had 5 years within which to do that. Everybody was quite clear. We got concessions in terms of civil service, superintendent positions that we'd never had before. You had a rock and roll with labor. It was respectful, but it was a rock and roll, okay? And we were able to do a lot, but you can't keep that going. Everybody also knew that there's going to be a time when that is open. You need to get in here and you need to do what needs to get done, but it is not going to wind up remaining indefinitely. And I will tell you that at the end of that, what I call the magnificent obsession, the Camelot magnificent obsession period, when yes, every single one of them, the subway was clean, the stations were clean. When they messed them up, we cleaned them up and all. But at the end of that, never shall forget the chairman of the board, who's passed now, Bob Kiley, and he taught me, well, between he and David, I had the opportunity to work with some tremendous people. We were a little nutty, but really just unbelievable people. But he said two things. One, he did what was an organizational review across the MTA agencies. They brought Towers Perrin in, looked at things across Long Island Railroad, Metro North, the Transit Authority, and stuff that they were doing a couple of things. One was to take a look at how you could modernize the agencies and work more effectively. And so things that people, and to be able to see it over really a 30-year period of time, things that people would have thought were heretical 30 years ago, to see how on the people side, internal changes have taken, organizations used to be everybody was siloed. Everybody had planning. Everybody had slow labor relations. Everybody had slow IT. Everybody had real estate. So to see where these things were spoken about, we've always done it this way, and to see the evolutions that have taken place in terms of bringing together core activities, making decisions about what would wind up being central responsibilities and versus what would wind up remaining at the agency level, with the outcome being that the MTA agencies, for the most part, there's been a lot more of the consolidation of kind of that core strategic stuff out of headquarters, and the agencies themselves have become much more operating agencies through the years. Once again, no evaluative judgment at all in this, but it's just the reality of what winds up happening within a broader organizational context, okay? And then the skill sets that are required are different types of skill sets when you wind up having fundamental changes in terms of the composition of what an agency does, okay? And I tell people, know yourself, and also do your homework and understand the agency, both the agency and then the broader context within which you operate, because all of that is going to be important in terms of who you are, who you are, and what you need in order to be able to be effective, okay? And the more you have done your homework and understand what you're walking into in terms of institutional framework and structure, you'll just be better armed, okay? And, here's a quick one on that, okay? I tell folks when you say, understand, okay, there's some places that are regional authorities, and for some people there, you're saying to yourself, Bev, I know all this, and I know you do, so just bear with me. There's some agencies that are regional authorities. They have their own governance structure. They have, everybody got a boss. So I tell folks all the time, get over that. Everybody gonna have a boss, okay? No matter how high you think you go, you got a boss, okay? Or bosses. But you've got regional authorities quasi-publics. They've got their own governance structure. They typically have some type of dedicated source of funding for which they have pretty much reasonable control over, a lot of control over. They may or may not have eminent domain and all of that. You have some agencies that are part of the city and a county government, okay? So your operating latitude, no, they don't have the same kind of dedicated funding stream. They don't have the same kind of autonomy in terms of their governance structures and stuff. And so understanding, and they can be big ones. I'm out here in the Bay Area. MUNI is part of San Francisco City and County. BART is a separate regional authority. VTA is a separate regional authority. All of them are extremely important. Folks have tremendous responsibilities and do great work, but they really operate within very, very, very different structures and strictures, okay? And so having some thought about that, okay, when you're making the decisions about where you might be interested in going, what kind of latitude do you like to have? If you're a person who's been very used to being able to, with your board, pretty much do what you need to do, it becomes a very different fishbowl when you wind up going and you've got city council members and county executives and all of that, and you're saying to yourself, but I need to get this done. I've never had to run my budget through this, and that. I basically had to convince this group, but I didn't have to convince all that. Oh my God, these folks are elected on top of that. We haven't had to do that before. So when you size up, kind of looking, just kind of making those kinds of decisions in terms of your life and you as a leader and what you think you need in order to be able to function. If you're a person who likes a lot of broad latitude, that kind of thing, just being at least thoughtful in terms of the institutional frameworks and structures within which the different agencies operate, I think is very helpful homework to have. Being clear about what your strengths are. I said there's sometimes that you're planning and thinking, okay, hopefully thinking before planning, but I said we do a lot of strategic planning, oftentimes don't do enough strategic thinking, but a planning organization is different than an operating organization, is different than a building organization, and what has been happening is in our sector, and we've seen quite a bit of it, is that we used to kind of think we had such a growth in the 70s and 80s of one generation plus systems. Okay, they're the 40, 45-year-old, 30 to 45-year-old systems, and it is quite different when you have been an organization that's been a planning organization that's turned to become a building organization for 20 or 30 years, and is now very deeply into being an operating organization that is no longer a newbie and who is also at the same time in a growth mode, okay? And that I will submit to you on top of obsolescence of infrastructure, lack of state of good repair, has been some of the tsunami that has wound up hitting our industry and hitting our industry in spades, so that what winds up happening is that your people are going, all of them, a lot of them, that we're pretty much kind of at least getting towards the end of that, but it has been horrifying over the last 10, 15-year period of time of having the same people who were the ones who basically planned, designed, and built systems and then moved over to begin operating them, but as new systems, having all of them retiring at the same time that the infrastructure, and it's actually, I think, harder. Having worked in New Yorks, the Jerseys, and the Bostons, I think in some respects it's actually harder when you're in the one generation plus systems like the SRTDs, the MARTAs, the WMATAs, and that where your infrastructure is all basically aging much more rapidly over the same period of time. And then it is not only your physical infrastructure, but it is the people as well, okay? And not having that depth and being in markets that are still very, very high growth, high expectation level markets. Those are the presenting trends and facts that is as far as the world that I see and have lived in, and I think it's it's very challenging. Okay, so I think that just kind of I'm going to be quiet. So for me, startup, fix up, change, transition. Houston was a startup. I did a little stint in Dallas. Okay, I basically wrote Dallas's first civil rights plan, and that was when the when the financial industry kind of tanked and the petroleum industry tanked. Everything tanked at Texas, and Dallas had to rethink its business model, and that was it. I went there for 1 year from New York and then went back from New York. They literally had not intended to really depend at all on federal funding in the very beginning, and they had to rewrite that script. And so basically, they brought people from all over the country over a couple of year period of time to get themselves federally ready, if you will, to be able to, because it was a changed business model, look at Dallas today, okay? So they were a transition situation. When I went to New York, that was a heavy turnaround situation. I left New York and I went to Jersey. Jersey was, I'd been in transit at that point for about 15 years and had never realized that New Jersey Transit Corporation literally ran as 3 separate entities: New Jersey Transit Bus Operations, New Jersey Transit Rail Operations, New Jersey Transit Headquarters, different pension plans, different everything, and they basically had done that to wall off the rest of the organization from railroad retirement. Well, in the 90s, when I went there from New York, literally there was an economic downturn. The agency had to wind up doing a consolidation. And when I say that, what I'm saying to you is that you had a vice president of finance for bus, a vice president of finance for rail, a vice president of finance for headquarters, HR director for rail, a HR director for headquarters, a HR director for bus. I'm just being, this is real. For those of you on the phone who know the depths of this, some of you will know what I'm talking about. Well, we had to wind up doing a consolidation. We literally had roughly about 800 headcount that needed to come out of the organization, roughly about 400. Some of that were really live bodies. And then we also had to wind up doing the consolidation of looking at pension plans, the whole 9 yards. And once again, big issues in terms of railroad retirement, which had been one of the reasons that they had done this kind of tri-structure, if you will, in New Jersey Transit over in the early years. Okay, so that was a transitional situation. Then I did a stint with the National Forum for Black Public Administrators. I went away from all of this, did some fascinating work over in South Africa, and then I sucked myself back in over at WMATA. And so I was at WMATA. That was during the period that we had the snowstorm, never shall forget, on January 6, 1996. We had the terrible accident at Shady Grove. The government was out. So we had all of that going on. And then left WMATA and that was some of the beginning of you could see it, elevators, escalators. I think if Larry Reuter had gone to Congress one more time to report on fatalities and incidents in terms of vertical systems, we all would have just, that's what I walked into. And that was WMATA back in the 90s. And of course, it's a very different structure even today. Had a very unique governance structure where there was effectively a way of coming at a majority that I'd never seen before, and that was you had to not only count the votes, but you had to have a right vote from each of the jurisdictions, okay? Once again, about governance, okay, and institutional framework and doing your homework ahead of time, okay? And then...
Bev, we got a couple of questions.
Okay, give me your questions. Okay, go ahead.
I want to make sure that they're answers. So our first question is from Alexander Cato, and I'm going to unmute him. He raised his hand so he can ask his question.
Okay, hit me, Alexander.
Alexander, you're unmuted.
Alexander.
Oh, all right. Alexander will come back. We got another question. The New York MTA announced a transformation plan. It sounds really similar to what you had described happening about 30 years ago. What are your thoughts on the cyclical nature of issues agencies face?
It's exactly what you said. They're cyclical. Okay, you know what I'm saying? And so I look at them for I just have an expectation, okay? And believe me, it's not about a right or wrong. I think that in a 30-year period of time, if you're not taking, not even 30 years, have an expectation. In fact, what I would tell you is to embrace change and embrace the thought of change. And definitely during these time periods, the notion that there's going to be anything that's going to be pat, I just say would be, we're living in a world of change, okay? Absolutely living in a world of change. And so, I don't do any of I try not to get into, is it this good or is it bad or what are the motivations behind it and all that. Anybody who is managing, number one, I think it's a good thing to wind up, don't get too comfortable, okay? I think there is a lot of, I love us to death, and I have stayed in this industry through all these years because really it's about people, it's about communities, and it's about outcomes and great work that we are privileged to be able to do, okay? But there is also a lot of inefficiency, okay? A lot of, and continues to be, that's the way we've always done it. And I say that you can't just change things on a dime, but I'm one who, I have every expectation that certainly probably just about any place I'd be, every 10, 15 years, I have some expectation that, there's going to be a real, let's think about it again. Let's look at it. Is there a different way? Is there a better way that we can wind up doing things? In this world of rapid change, embrace it, okay? Because that's really the stuff that's happening around us is, and I hope that we as a sector will become much more proactive than we are reactive, okay? And unfortunately, I think we are a bit too reactive and not proactive enough. So I look forward to what will come out of this latest one for the MTA.
That leads actually into our next question, which is, you talked a lot about different trends that are happening in the industry right now, but what is really the most pressing issue that you see facing transit service providers across the nation?
I will tell you that I think this whole thing in terms of what I was just saying about embracing change, okay? We act like mobility management is a new thing, and quite candidly, I can tell you, I've been around 40 years. We've been talking about it for roughly about 15, okay? What tends, in my humble estimation, and I've grown up in this industry, so I know I'm a part of it, is that we are reactive, okay? And what unfortunately too often happens to us is that the rest of the world, and now it's happening even more, the rest of the world changes, and we're still trying to preserve the same little boats that we're in, okay? And I think part of it is because as a sector, we try to kind of not hurt anybody, and so that means that we've always got to compromise, and unfortunately what winds up happening is that then you have big things that we didn't really make a place at the table for, and I'll tell you exactly what I'm talking about. Initially, people didn't, it was like, new starts? Because it was about urban systems, okay? New starts, things like new starts, working groups and stuff like that, groups got together that were in new growth areas. They just funded it and started doing and saying, look, we hear what you all are saying, but you're not really making a place at the table for us. And so we got to do what we got to do. So we're going to do our own thing. Of course, now quickly everybody catches up, but we're behind the 8 ball. Folks started on streetcars. We had to start over to the side with coalitions, bus rapid transit, high-speed rail. we're not as mobility, okay? It was first, hell no, we won't go. Things like ADA, I can remember when folks had to come and literally handcuff themselves to buses, okay, into areas because we as an industry refused to wind up saying, just let's go for 100% accessibility. And so I'll tell you that out of that little ranting I just gave is that those are just examples of us not leading the way, but getting rolled by the way, okay? And I think that for us, understanding that we are not the it, and being much more progressive, much more innovative, is the biggest thing, one of the biggest challenges that faces us as an industry.
Thank you. And I've got a question that Alexander was the one who asked, so he typed it in for us. Mm-hmm. He really would love to know more about your Youth to American Infrastructure program. He sees a lot of agencies working on equity metrics and such, but not a ton of emphasis on internal equity, especially at that executive leadership level. So he was curious kind of about your Youth to American Infrastructure program and how you see that possibly, being the key to solving those issues of equity within the agencies.
Okay, so let me tell you about introducing Youth to American Infrastructure plus AYA, and I will tell you that I had all the graphics and all that were designed by young people because I probably would never have done script, and I definitely would not have picked blue and yellow. And I give all credit to that to young people at Kennedy High School in Richmond, California. But here's the thing. I have been, as Aaron and them said in the very beginning, I've always been very much about the people, okay? And that's the people in communities and the people within the organizations. I used to say, you take care of the people and they'll take care of the product, okay? And I believe that and we talk a good game, and when we say people are our number one resource, but then I say, well, how do you show that? How do we show that? We have very few metrics, and we and I often tell people too, people respect what you inspect. Now let's just be real. And I'm not saying anything here I haven't said to FTA. I said, we'll come do a 26 point on a 26 point on might be 28 now, but on a triennial. And quite candidly, the only thing that folks are for the most part routinely picking up are my drug and alcohol testing and looking at my EEO reports, some of which are getting dust on the shelf, okay? But in terms of the kind of metrics, in terms of what's happening with retirements, what's happening in terms of attendance, absenteeism, training, those kinds of things, which are really serious issues, okay? When there's an accident or something horrifying happens, everybody wants to see everything. But to say just as what do I have as metrics in those areas, including, Alex, the whole issue of, well, how do we really look in terms of diversity, not just in terms of the people who are here, the pipeline and all of that. So how do we really evaluate that? So anyway, for me, and so that's a lot of why you see the Introducing Youth to American Infrastructure Plus. I would go into communities, and many of the places I've worked the older systems, but more in the middle of my career was more the what I call the one generation plus systems, where you really were having just massive turnover of just really, I'm telling you, people who were like masters. They basically knew they designed it, they'd done everything. They just knew the systems like the back of their hands, and to have them just leaving out in droves was just horrifying. And not knowing where the next replacements were going to come from, not the fault of the transit agencies. Most of our positions are really frontline positions, and that's in the transit industry. That's about 80% of our positions. And many of those positions, while a college degree, and I take nothing away from it, is important. Many of them are very technically girded, okay, and they do not require a college degree in the first instance. They come out of, they used to be vocational education was a good feed for us, and military bases and all that. And a lot of that's really been drying up, and so we wind up finding ourselves with this gap. So the bottom line was, I'd go in communities And then if folks would be trying to say, well, how am I going to wind up training the next workforce? And sometimes they'd have a program at a high school. Most of the time they didn't. If they had one, they didn't realize that there were maybe 25 or 50 others in places of the country. They didn't have to wind up developing an electromechanical tech program from scratch. There were already others that were out there who would be more than happy to share. So I started seeing that kind of stuff, that there was no connectivity, or very difficult to have connectivity, and we kind of play it again, Sam. And then here was the thing that happened to me that made me broaden it. And I said, this is crazy. We got to get the pipeline going, okay? And I kept seeing all the gray hairs like myself at all the meetings and all this kind of stuff like this. Is like, come on now, if we really mean this, we've got to do a much better job of bringing young people into this industry. And then I serve on a presidential appointee to the National Infrastructure Advisory Council, which looks at the 16 critical infrastructure sectors across the nation, and 4 of which are considered to be the lifeline sectors: transport, power, water sector, and telecommunications, IT. Every single one of those sectors suffers from exactly, the telecommunications IT is a little bit different, but still major workforce gaps, and particularly, and documentable, I mean, just horrifying, okay? And they have major systemic persistent problems in terms of underrepresentation of women and people of color, okay? And that is where I was born. I said, when we get the opportunity, and every one of them also has the same problem, image problem of, I'll tell you what happened in transit. I chaired the first commission we had on workforce and transit, and then a blue ribbon commission later. And the first time that we did it, and we had National Academy of Science, they went out and they looked and they surveyed and everything. So they went and they talked to young people. So when they came back and talked to those of us who were on this big task force, they said, well, the good thing about it is that the young people don't feel badly about you all. So we were preening in the room like, yeah, that's a good thing. And they said, but let us tell you the other flip of it. They don't think anything about you at all, okay? And so there were like these down faces that were like, oh, my God, okay. And it's really an image issue, and it's an image issue that's kind of shared across these infrastructure sectors. And it's amazing, okay? Young people really, what they think they know of us is very limited, and this is across all the sectors, okay? And I'm sitting up, I'm saying, I don't have to make up being a lean green machine. You're concerned about the environment. Here we are, okay? And they just don't see it, okay? And so I say that we're introducing you to American Infrastructure Plus. The plus is very important. Because that's about values and outcomes, okay? I take the perspective that what's kept me in this industry all of these years, I love all the millions of pieces that move, but I tell you, it's always about people, it's about communities, and it's about outcomes. And so what I say to young people is enthusiastically, okay, to motivate them. It's the truth. I tell them, let me tell you, I'm the biggest charlatan in the world. I've been in the public transport sector for 40 years. And what I have honestly been privileged to do is be in the doggone business of community building. And that's what it's about. And it don't get better than that, okay? So if you're concerned about housing affordability, if you're concerned about whether you have a park, if you're concerned about your streetscape, if you'd like to wind up being able to have a curb cut, if you don't want to have those fatalities because you don't have the light, if you want to wind up having better sewage, if you want all of these things, all of them, that have an absolute impact on the quality of your life, your family, your community, your neighborhood, your environmental. These are the careers that if you are the one that is sitting behind the desk out there in the shop, working in the planning area, these are the decisions that you can be the one that helps make them. Okay, and then ultimately get yourself on up there so that you can be the one that's making the resource allocation decisions so that those things that you do not like, you can change. Okay, and that, I submit to you, is the twist. Instead of thinking so much about talking about the toys and the this and the screws and the widgets and all of that, which are all important, it is repositioning We are in the business of community building. And the plus part about it is that, and so you can't just be an Aya and just, I want you to be smart, but values. So it's equity, sustainability, resilience, civic participation, okay, are important. How do young people get that nowadays? Because most places don't even require them to take civics, okay? And so we send them to boot camp, okay? So there's a project we have, which is the My Beloved Community Transformative Justice Project. So we have young people out doing community assessment. And I tell them, you come to this table, don't just think that people just in here telling you stuff, because you come to this table as, in most instances, high school. We want to take it down to middle school and also to elementary school, but you got to crawl, you got to walk before you can run. You come as 15, 16, and 17-year-olds, and you bring a tremendous learned experience in terms of your community and the infrastructure that you have or you do not have, okay, and your families and all that. So I'm respecting that you come as a customer and you come as someone who has absolute subject matter expertise in this whole area of infrastructure. And so we want to work together. They do community assessments, and then the other, so that but what happens is we just walk it. We do stuff every day, and it's invisible. And we help young people to really do their own assessment, to say, yeah, well, I want you to look at those curb cuts. I want you to look at the maintenance in your area, or you have it or you don't have it. I want you to look at those pipes. I want you to look at the trees. Do you have trees? Don't you have trees? Do you have a park? Where is the park? If you wanted a bike path, could you have a bike path? To get them to actually look at it, look at theirs, look at other, we had a pilot program in DC this year, and we had the students do not only their area, but look at other wards, okay, and then they do a docu-short, okay, which is we show them they know how to use their phones and all that kind of stuff already, but then they tell their own story, okay, of what has particularly resonated with them, and they do their own little documentary on that, and then the key thing for them is now, and what will you do differently? Okay, and we do mapping exercises, follow the money, follow the decision making, just to get them to think critically about, well, who runs these agencies? We had DC Water, DC Energy, DC Power, MARTA, Amtrak, who runs them? How are they appointed or elected or whatever, so that they can begin to get that kind of critical life kind of skill stuff. And then on top of that, how do you do your resume, communication, some on financial literacy. This piece I was telling you about entrepreneurism, we try to make sure that there are people that, come to the classes and make sure very, very diverse representation, so that young people have an opportunity to see people that are like themselves, okay? And say, well, oh my God, that person owns a business and they're doing da 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 da, and I could do that too. So we got a lot. I thought about it for a number of years, and I made the big decision about a year and a half to stop talking about it and get out there and do it. And I've just been, we've been tremendously blessed, and invite all of you, because it's really about a network, and it's just about trying to do what you can. It's not a cookie cutter, not making this stuff up. Anybody who's doing great work, the whole notion of getting out there and doing community assessments and stuff. There were some people at Harvard, but on top of that, UC Berkeley out here has had a Y plan, youth plan, action now for 20 years, okay? And what it is young people really getting engaged in their own communities, doing assessments, doing analysis, and giving their own ideas and thoughts in terms of what needs to be done to improve their lives. So that's Aya in a nutshell, and we want to create an army. We want to create an army. That's it. So I hope that was helpful.
For anyone who wants some more information on Aya, we do have the website on the last slide of this presentation, so you'll be able to look it up and find out more. We have time for about one more question. So we have a question that is asking, Have you always known that you wanted to be a leader? And what advice do you have for people who really feel more comfortable more in the follow role or in the execution role? And what advice do you have for those people?
Oh, let me tell you. I always know I wanted to be a leader. I think I did, okay, because I think I did. I had one of those. I had a type A personality, so I think I always knew that I knew I wanted to make a difference, okay? And I think what I found was that the best way for me to be able to do that was to be able to have more control over the destiny of the ship, so to speak, including my own ship, okay? Now, I will tell you, however, that is probably the question you have asked. You just asked and said, well, tell us about the other. That's one of the biggest things that I will tell you that you need to make the decision about, and there is not a right or wrong, okay? As who are you? What are you? Where do you want to be in your totality? And making the decision as to how far up you want to go and what really turns you on, okay? I have a son who has absolutely no interest in being the C-suite person. Now, you give him 40 apps that he can work on, largely with himself and his little team, and exceptional work. I mean, excited as heck, okay? But so knowing yourself is one of the biggest gifts that you can give to yourself, and then being true to yourself, okay? So because it can get very lonely, I'll be honest, I mean, it can get very, very lonely in that C-suite. It's not all that it's trekked up to be, it's not like, oh, if you don't get up to the C-suite, that means that you left something on the ground. Absolutely not, okay? So that's one of the biggest, and then I would tell you, so these are little things that I wanted to say as gifts that I would give you, okay? Take them if you will, okay? One of them is please get to know yourself and give yourself the time to know yourself. I know that sounds trite, but the time that you give yourself frequently, but every year, okay, to actually do that assessment and spend some time with you to think through where you are in your life, what's happening, what you've made a plan. Please make a plan, okay? If I could give you any gift, make a plan, okay? Now that plan's going to get worked and it's going to get reworked because it's a plan. But the more intentionality that you can bring to the game of life in your career and your total life, the more intentionality that you can bring to it, the better, because that way things are not just happening to you. You are being an active part, okay? Just so like you're playing it, okay? And I'm saying, and I tell a lot of people all the time, life not a spectator sport. You gotta play it, okay? Figure out what you like and you don't like, what your strengths are, your things that are challenging to you. I don't like to call them weaknesses, okay? I'm one who believes some people think that you should work on all your weaknesses. I'm the one that doesn't think that way. I think you need to understand that whatever you're not as good in, do not be afraid. Hire to your weakness, not your strength. I got enough of Bev. I don't need a bunch of more Bevs. I need to be clear about what I don't know and try to get the best people that I can who do know and respect that, okay? Because it's always going to wind up taking a team. And I put more time on trying to understand what my strengths are and align myself with either organizations and people in that way, okay? So I know what I'm good at, and I know what I personally good at, and there's some organizations I would never have applied. I just never would have applied for. It's not that they're not great places, but it's just something that I would have said, well, Bev, yeah, you can do anything with the right group of people, but that's not really, I wouldn't be the one that's not really what your particular strengths are. And I do think that you need to be able to occupy some part of the ground you're standing on when you're in an organization that has a very presenting portfolio. I used to tell board members, I have tremendous respect for the person who can fix the propulsion system. I'm not the one, okay? Now, I know they need to be fixed, and I'm going to try to make sure I got the best people to fix it, but there are some settings you're in where you literally, if you needed to rack it up and pull it out, you need to be able to, and look at it, you need to be able to do so, okay? And if that's not you, then you need to, accordingly, okay? Being clear about what's important to you, okay? And then ask yourself the question, what energizes me? When I get down, when I get like I call on low voltage, okay, what are the things that uplift me? What are the things? Who are the people? What are the circumstances? And I will tell you, understanding how you recharge yourself, okay, and giving yourself the time to wind up getting recharged and rest and learn how to, all of that. And I'm telling you a lot of things that I'm telling you, please do as I say, not at all like what I did in many times of my life, okay? So I'm going to tell you, take the time to be selfish, okay, because if you're not doing good things for yourself, you're not going to be able to, you will ultimately not be effective in your broader home life and certainly not in your work environment, okay? Understand, select carefully those people in your life and at work that are going to be in what I call your front row. And everybody cannot be in your front row, okay? You need to pick your front row people very, very carefully, because those will be the people that will be with, that you will be depending on, and they'll be depending on you, okay? If I could say other ones, your North Star, whatever those guiding lights are that are your values, okay? And those are not gray areas. Guiding your values and principles are not gray areas. There are a lot of stuff that is gray. And, you can do a little bit of this and you can dance and you can do that. But the clearer you are about what those, I call them those North Star things are, those values, those lines, those boundaries that you do not compromise, I will tell you that it will make your life simpler in a lot. I've been in environments where people told me before I got the job, oh, Bev, you better watch it. Them politicians are going to be coming at you. They're used to nepotism. They're used to this. They're used to that. I'm not trying to say I'm a Puritan, but I will tell you this. When you're real clear with people about who you are and what you do and what ticks you, I ain't get them calls. Okay? I might have gotten the first one, but I wasn't trying to be a kamikaze mission, but you just let people, you're very clear about those things that it just ain't me. Okay? And I will tell you, now, it might mean that, somebody told me one time, I wound up saying it wasn't me, and then we wound up having an IG come live with us for like about 7 to 8 months. But that's all right, okay? But I didn't get those calls, okay? You know what I'm saying? Trying to be as keyed in as you can to, and I grew up in a much older world when. So I had to really progress in terms of, I used to say I was a single working mom for much of my life. And so I said I cared about their child more than I cared about mine, but I had to make a decision about whether I was going to feed him, clothe him, and put a roof over his head. Every time I had a sniffle, he had a sniffle, I was going to stay home. They didn't have things like FMLA and all of that. And so I was a pretty harsh person, I think much harder in the beginning as the world began to change. I've gotten I'm much more modern than I was, but there was a period I really, really tugged with that because I had it really rough. And like I said, nobody cared about their child more than I cared about mine, but I just didn't have all of that. I think all of that is good. I also think that we are in a business that requires 24/7. Now, everybody don't have to 24/7, but it's 24/7. And I also think that responsibly, you need to look at the environment. You need to look at what the expectation is. And there are some sectors or businesses or jobs that simply are not for you. It's not a bad thing, but when you look at the broader, what needs to be accomplished, and think to yourself, well, if everybody did what I'm trying to do, could we, in fact, wind up doing the mission? And I think those are those moments of honesty that you just have to have with yourself, okay? Because this is not a, it's not a job for everybody. What I would say to people is nowadays, continuous learning. We were talking about change earlier, but continuous learning, in fact, it needs to be in the DNA. If I could imprint it on everybody's DNA, okay? And I think putting tools and toolkits. Okay, that means every single set of competency, skill, whether it's languages, ability to deal with difficult people, technical, IT. I struggle with it all the time. I'm the biggest dinosaur in the world, and I know it, and I work at it religiously. And I say there's a difference between stupidity and ignorance. Stupid you can't help, but ignorance is a lack of experience and exposure. We all have it. And understanding what your blind spots are, and being not being afraid to say that I need help. Okay, will be because we're gonna be learning for a lifetime. Okay, and then I would time, if in a regular world of work, I told you about everybody can't be in your front row, and trying to be clear about what your presenting best skill sets are. But the other things I will tell you is time management. Okay, time management. I've never been great at it. I have worked at it. And one of the little things I used to do for myself at the end of the week, I would look at, and people don't use inboxes in the same way, but I would look and I'd say, Beverly, what didn't you complete that only you could have done? And this is not saying everybody that, you don't do windows and floors. But, and then when I would see that I had left stuff that was really CEO work that had to be done by me. And then I would look at, I'd assess for myself, well, if you didn't get this done, what did you do? Okay. And that is one of the best things that you can do, no matter how you're doing it, looking at what's in your technical box, but just asking yourself the question, because that helps you to think through how you are most effectively using time. I will tell you in terms of meetings, being clear about who has to be at a meeting, when you have to wind up having a meeting, not wasting everybody's time in a meeting, that kind of thing, and delegation, okay? In order for you to be effective, you have to learn how to be able to delegate. Now, delegate with controls. Delegation is not abrogation, but delegation. So time management, meetings are a big, and I tell you, when you go through that stuff, you can literally, I teach a leadership class every once in a while, and literally one of the things that people go through, they do it through the diary and all of that, and to have, folks really have come back and said, you know what, I wound up saving 6 hours on a regular basis of my time in a week, okay, because of literally looking at how am I using my time and how could I use my time more effectively, okay? And those are really gifts that you give yourself, because I will tell you at the end of the day, one thing you cannot buy back and you cannot recreate is time. And you only have so much.
And on the topic of time, we are out of time for this webinar.
Okay.
But thank you. Thank you so much, Bev, for sharing your insights. There are a slew of questions that we'll have to get to another time. And thank you, everyone, for attending. I do want to let you all know that we are having our quarterly innovation webinar. It's on November 19th. We do these, they're smaller webinars, and they're really on a more minute topic. This one is on mobility data sharing. So if you're interested in that, the information can be found on our website, and you'll also be receiving emails. Thank you again, Dr. Scott, for sharing your leadership journey with us and some excellent advice. I know I took down a ton of notes. And thank you, everyone, for attending. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye, everyone.